When looking for the king of podcasts, you're at the wrong channel.
Well, excuse me!
Looking for good ideas for life? You're far from good hands.
Hey, bud, what's your problem?
If you think the listener is always right, you're far from the right place.
Out of order! Even in the future, nothing works!
Hosted by a Northeasterner by birth, but a rebel by choice.
Are you threatening me?
If you want a host that floats between love and madness,
and we know the night is always gonna be here anyway. Thinking of you's working up my appetite, looking forward to a little afternoon delight.
then play on and listen to Crazy Train Radio.
All right, guys, listen to this blues riff and B. Watch me for the changes and try and keep up, okay?
Within the gaming world, there are your general gamers, but then there are those that enjoy the dark underbelly of gaming. If you're one of those that enjoy the dark underbelly of gaming, we certainly got the place to send you. Scorpion Lair Games. That's right, Scorpion Lair Games is the creators of the true crime hit Killers, the card game. Let's not forget they also have Killers Clothing Company, their profiler game, and things like the 5-Minute Murder channel on YouTube. And we certainly can't forget the new book that is certainly a hit, Beyond the Headliners, True Crimes, Myths, and Legends. Make sure you visit Jeff and the Scorpion Lair Games on Facebook and everywhere today.
Hey, this is Bruce Pritchard, and you're listening to Crazy Train Radio, and don't ever forget, I love you.
Hey folks, it's your least favorite host in the podcast world, Croc, Jonathan Steele. And boy, do we have a good one for you today.
Ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, children of all ages. If there is a standard bearer or perfect movie, it would be probably this film we are talking about tonight, folks. From having a troubled start to what we see now. So from beginning to end, it had its many hiccups per se. But it seems that over the 85 years or so, it has become more of a brand than just a fan favorite film, and few pictures become such an iconic part of our history, film-wise, and of American culture. That project would be The Wizard of Oz.
Toto, I have a feeling we're not in Kansas anymore.
And to break this down with me tonight is first we have Andrew Scahill, and he is a assistant professor of film at the University of Colorado, Denver. He also is an author of the Revolting Child in horror cinema, and he was also featured in a documentary film called Scream Queen, My Nightmare on Elm Street.
You've got the body. I've got the brain.
Andrew, how you doing, sir?
I'm doing well. Thank you for having me on. This is
Should I call you Andrew, Andy? What do you prefer?
Andy's good. Yeah, even
Okay.
with my students, Andy's fine.
Okay. Wanted to ask because he put himself as Andy in the Zoom call. The other one is a familiar voice, sadly enough for the rest of us.
Yeah, I'm sorry.
Is a is a historian, researcher, writer, and occasional cigar expert, and he is the co-host of the Transatlantic History Ramblings Podcast, Mr. Brian Young. How are you this evening?
Whoa, you got the name of the show right.
Holy shit, dude.
That's one of our ribs there, Andy. I always screw up the name just to piss him off.
I am fantastic, and I'm so glad you asked me to be on this because the topic is amazing. And Andy, who I've never met until now, and I heard there was some smack talk before I got here, but that's not gonna affect my opinion because I'm actually a great fan of his work, and I loved you in Scream Queen. It was fantastic. I'm a film nut and I'm a film nerd, and I'm very proud of the fact that I'm a film nerd. I always tell people I've lectured at places on some of the greatest filmmakers in history, and I've done presentations on Ken Russell and Ingmar Bergman and David Lynch, and yet I'm still a horror nut. My favorite genre is horror. I appreciate all film. I love horror. And of all the documentaries, not just about the horror genre, but about a particular aspect of the horror genre, Scream Queen might have been one of the best ones I've ever seen. And it absolutely, and I cannot recommend that highly enough, people. You got to find that documentary. It's incredible.
Thanks, sir. I appreciate it. Yeah, it's a documentary that I think could have been a little fan service film, but it's really about more. It's about an era, and so I really appreciate that. Thank you.
Yeah, it's incredible. Now, gloves are off because we're gonna have some fun tonight.
Yes, and for all the ball breaking that fans know I do, especially between me and Brian. And I know I said this to Andy a day or two ago as we were talking. I do want to give Brian his flowers a little bit, which is shocking because, get a tissue because it's the one time you only get this from me.
It's coming.
Yeah, but I told Andy that when I told Brian that he was going to be here, first words out of Brian's mouth was, "Wow, that's my dream job."
Yeah.
So,
yeah.
I mean, it sounds like you're doing pretty close to your dream job right now.
Well, it's because you don't know what I do all day at the day job. But my problem was, and I can't have your job because I have no degree. So I was, true story, I was once interviewing the head of Princeton University's antiquities department and ancient culture on my show. And we were discussing ancient Greek literature. And partway through the interview, she's like, "Wow, I've never spoken to anybody who knows as much about Greek literature as you do. Was that what you majored in?" And I said, "No, honey, I never went to college. I had 4 years of drinking to do." And she actually said, "That's probably good. College might not getting a degree. Instead, I earned my degree the hard way by my own research and reading."
Nice. Well, obviously, we're going to discuss Wizard of Oz. And there's just so much history, so many documentaries out. Just there's a lot to do it. Andy actually teaches a course on Oz as well. So I'll ask you, gentlemen, where do we begin when discussing the 1939 film?
I'd like to begin, since you do a course on it, Andy, I'd like to, before we actually get to the epic 1939 production, which, you know, what you said in the introduction, I think is correct. I cannot think of any other film that can be more universally recognized as the quintessential American film for generations other than The Wizard of Oz. But my question to you is, why did all the other efforts essentially fail, including the ones that, you know, Baum created himself with his own film company? Why was the magic never achieved in any of the other productions of Oz until this 39 film?
Yeah, I think it's a great question. I think it is I always think of The Wizard of Oz, the film anyway, being a movie about going to the movies, right? Where
Mhm.
when Dorothy opens that door, it's the Technicolor screen, and she's literally kind of walking into a cinema itself. And I think it just hit that moment historically where people were looking for the promise of escapism. And here's a film that says, look at everything that we can do. Look at the fantasies that we can give you. You don't have to um, you don't have to go experience them themselves. We are the kind of producers of dreams, right? The dream factory. And so I think it has the awe to it. It has the inherent metaphor of the joy of going to the movies in it, and kind of wrapped in this really kind of lush fantasy, I would say. What are your thoughts? Yeah.
It's almost, and this is going to sound weird, I think, to a lot of people out there, but I think the two of you will understand what I mean. It's almost about 12 years ahead of its time, because when the advent of television started scaring the shit out of the movie industry is when they decided to go, oh yeah, it was so ahead of its time. And it's the perfect storm of the perfect music, the perfect performers, the over-the-top production value, the escapism and fantasy. In fact, I don't even know if it's so much the story for The Wizard of Oz itself that captures everybody as all the other elements.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, yeah, and I think the what it produces is this level of spectacle that you couldn't escape into, right? That itself, it was cinema as a kind of Ozian journey.
Very much so. Do you like the other versions? Do you like the older versions, the silent Wizard of Oz films, the ones that Frank Baum made himself?
Yeah, I'm not a big fan. They feel flat to me. And in fact, I don't really even use them when I teach this course.
You don't even like to point out that, look, there's Oliver Hardy before he was famous.
Perfect, right, exactly.
They do fall flat, and I don't know if it's because, maybe he wanted too much control over it, and he was not a filmmaker.
Mm-hmm.
The films, they're almost garish looking, even for the time.
Right.
They're somewhat unsettling looking. They're not escapist fantasy. Is more there. I don't want to use the term grotesque because it's overused, but they are grotesque, some of them.
Right, right.
And it also makes you realize that, okay, here's where the hate mail comes in. His books weren't that great, and the liberties that the studio took with the original works kind of made the film magical.
It made sense, right? It made it into more of a quest narrative.
Yep.
Yeah, whereas, and I always say whenever I teach the Bond novel, right, these were meant to be bedtime stories, and so it has like an episodic quality that makes sense when you're kind of reading segments in small pieces to a child. But when it comes to a film with a 2-hour runtime, you want a sort of more structured narrative.
Yeah, and they took liberties that a lot of people would be right.
So I'll throw this out there because the different versions you were talking about pre-39, I'd be curious to know everybody's thoughts on I guess, inspired by, you consider it, in the 1979 film The Wiz. So where would that stand when you're comparing it to 39?
The Wiz was a phenomenon that was for a specific time. And I don't think it translates to even now. And I think the proof of that is, if you're talking about musical versions now, even though 39 is a musical, people forget that it's a musical. More people are going to talk about Wicked than they are The Wiz.
Which, does anybody know when that's coming out on film? I know it was announced for this year, but
I don't, actually.
I think next year, I'm assuming around some holiday.
Okay. So
this is an interesting one, though, right? It's for me, it takes a lot of the kind of ideology of the 39 film, this sort of complacency, don't wish for more than you want, be content with what you have and what's in your own backyard. And it turns that on its head, right? It says, actually, that doesn't work for us. And it's not so much about home as a physical space as it is about a heritage. Right, as a space that you can connect to, that is part of your own sort of ancestral history, and so that's really kind of compelling. I think just how it, in a lot of ways, rejects the kind of thinking of the 39 film and speaks back to it, and I find it really, really interesting in that regard.
It is, and it is a bit more of a rebellious film. But it's also about social upheaval and rebellion of the time, and it which is why I say it's such a product of its time.
Yeah.
It's not timeless.
Yeah,
some of the performances are, and I think if you showed people that film now, some of the production numbers would stand out and be memorable, but the film as a whole wouldn't.
Yeah,
it doesn't stand up.
Yeah, I agree.
Which is going to happen to Wicked in 10 years too. There'll be production numbers that'll stand out to people, but as a whole, I don't think it'll resonate. It does now. It's the right time for it. Whereas the 39 MGM Wizard of Oz somehow became timeless.
Well, obviously, back in 39, when the film was released and stuff, there was influences from Disney's Sleeping Beauty, or not Sleeping Beauty, Snow White, excuse me. But also, as far as Brian's point with a musical side of things, Arthur Freed came from a musical background, who was one of the big wigs in putting this project together. But at that time, it was part of that quote unquote big studio system. And I know one of the things that was heavily debated at the time with casting and such was, why not go with MGM property Shirley Temple, who was the hottest act at the time, but then they went with Judy Garland. So I know it's all hearsay at this point, but would the film been as iconic if they went with Shirley instead of Judy?
I'll let you go first on that, because I definitely have an opinion on it, but I'll let you go.
Yeah, I don't think it would have. I think it would have been a good film. I think it would have had appeal to families. I think Judy Garland's casting somehow makes it transcend that. There's something about how womanly her voice is, I think, in this sort of small framed body that's so compelling. There's something in her eyes that speaks to some of the pain that I think she's going through. So I think Judy Garland brings an immense amount to this role that I'm not sure would have been the same with Shirley Temple.
It's the voice. It's not even the look, the acting skill, the age. It's the fact that if it wasn't for Somewhere Over the Rainbow, I don't think Oz would be as remembered at it in the time, let alone today. And I don't think Shirley Temple singing that would have made it timeless. It's Judy Garland's. Look, grown men cry when they hear her sing that song to this day. Why? Because it's been part of their whole lives. They remember from when they're little kids to now. I mean, it's so iconic. And the song would have been good without her. Still a great song. But really, with Shirley Temple, singing it resonate with an audience and be so remembered.
I heard of once in a lullaby.
It wouldn't. Plus, the other thing, Shirley Temple was closer to the age that Dorothy would have been in the book.
Right.
But you would have lost a large part of the audience who didn't want to go see a film that was about a little kid for kids.
Right.
Judy Garland was an established actress, not the superstar she'd become, but she was a bankable commodity. She could draw in an audience that didn't have to be children. It was a smart decision. Mm-hmm. Plus, I think there might have been some insurance risks having someone as young as Shirley Temple on the set. I don't think it was the safest set with some of the technology and inventions. I mean, there were accidents to begin with on the set. Margaret Hamilton got hurt. Twice, I believe she got hurt.
I'll get you, my pretty, and your little dog, too.
One time, the flames didn't... Sorry, Brian.
Yeah.
But I say it's funny, but it's not funny. They wanted her to do another fire stunt, to which she said no. No, I just recovered for 6 weeks from her accident.
Yeah.
And then her stunt devil reluctantly said, yeah, okay, I'll do it. She got hurt and spent 11 days in the hospital. And she got that big ass check of a grand $35 when she got out of the hospital.
Yeah, I mean, we all can't be Kane Hodder, who nearly lose our lives in a fire stunt and then say, you want to do another fire stunt? Okay. He's not human. Let's face it. But I mean, and I'm not saying it was necessarily the studio's fault, but you were dealing with an incredibly enormous film, so much equipment, so much stuff going on. It would have been dangerous to have a kid on set, I think. That's just me. I would feel much safer with, Judy Garland than Shirley Temple.
I think Shirley Temple she's a dancer who can sing.
Yeah.
Whereas Judy Garland is a sort of vocal powerhouse.
Yes.
Who also at times can dance. But I think we would have seen a much cutesier portrayal of Dorothy, much more dance focused, quite likely. They would have kept the jitterbug number in, I'm sure.
Mm-hmm.
So I think we would have had a different beast of a film.
Completely different film, yeah.
Speaking of injuries, set related, and I guess it could be a flip of a coin when you say how it would have done, like I asked with Shirley Temple and all. But the original Tin Man, Buddy Epstein, had his issue with the makeup. And he ended up in the hospital, and Tin Man was recast and all that stuff. Do you think that was partially because of maybe inexperience with makeup and all at the time?
Oh yeah.
Or what do you think was the reasoning why they did what they did, then ended up changing?
When a man's an empty kettle, he should be on his mettle, and yet I'm torn apart. Just because I'm presuming that I could be kinda human if I only had a heart.
I will defer to Andy on this. It's more of a specialty, but I think it was just new makeup that they didn't realize what could be done, and they kind of messed up and almost killed the poor guy.
I think there's such a push to innovate in this film with Technicolor, with some of the scale of production, the sort of pyrotechnics. That I think that they really pushed themselves to create a different look on film, and that meant, you're right, using supplies that maybe were not fully tested and thought through.
It's funny because for years, you'd always heard the rumor that Buddy Epson got the silver paint in his lungs and almost died, and he had to be replaced. And I remember people would joke, yeah, but how funny would it have been to have Jed Clampett as the Tin Man? And it would have been so bad. Until the DVD, I believe it was the first DVD release that had all the music pre-recorded the film, and all the Buddy Epson songs were on there, and they were great. And you're like, oh yeah, I guess he could have done it because the songs sound great with Buddy Epson doing them. So just a freak accident.
Yeah. So the other thing I found interesting in doing a little bit of a deep dive was the consideration of using Leo the Lion, who most people would recognize as the MGM logo. and then hiring somebody to do the voiceover. I don't know how well that would have worked because obviously, and I'm having a brain fart. Who played the Cowardly Lion?
Ray Bolger.
Thank you.
Burt Lahr. I'm sorry, Burt Lahr.
Yeah. He actually wore a real lion's outfit. You know, that was real lion hair, the whole bit. And of course, with the lights and everything else, they had to put that thing in an industrial dryer every night so it'd be ready for set the next day. So do you think Leo the Lion would have actually made it better or worse for what they did?
I think there'd have been more accidents on the set.
True.
Here, we got some meat here for you.
The Cowardly Lion is such an interesting character, right? I mean, it's hard to not think about the sort of queerness of this film. But the Cowardly Lion is a sissy, you know, and he's not punished for it, which is maybe the most incredible thing within this film. But I think it has to have that kind of humanity to it for this role. I don't think it would have worked with kind of
because he's a self-hating sissy. He doesn't want to be a sissy. That's all he wants is to not be a sissy.
Yeah, it's sad, believe me, missy, when you're born to be a sissy without the vim and vibe. But I could show my prowess, be a lion, not a mouse, if I only had the nerve.
Is that how you read him? That's how, yeah.
No, that's not how I read him. But I think that's how, like, you know, so some people would say, yeah, he may be queer, but he don't want to be. He's going to go to conversion therapy. That's why he's got courage.
But it's that courage is just such a facade in this film, you know?
It's a beard.
Yeah, exactly.
Really, you're gonna say the Cowardly Lion's the queer icon in a Judy Garland film?
Oh,
give me a break.
All of it. All of it. There's so many reasons, you know, that this has had an attachment in the queer community.
All right. As a heterosexual,
yes, tell me.
I'm gonna say you bring up flying fucking monkeys and those fighting words. You leave my bellboy dressed monkeys alone.
Well, you know, on a really base level, it's about leaving a small town where there's no future for you and going to this place, right, where you have opportunities. You have a chosen family that you create. And I think for queer people, the tragedy of this film is that she ever goes home. You know, the fact that she didn't stay there where she was essentially royalty, where she had a family that cared for her, to go back to Kansas, which
cared for her as she was.
Yeah, the farm is going to be taken away. That's unresolved within the film, right? There is no place for her, and yet she has to not only go back, but sort of like rescind all desire to want more. You know, that if I ever go looking for my heart's desire, I won't go past my own backyard. You know, it's fascinating the kind of recompense she has to go through.
It's a very conservative hetero viewpoint, isn't it?
Well, I think that's like when there is this sort of queer reassessment is that she goes and she stays there or not, which is actually the original intention of Baum, that she was always able to go back, right?
Whenever she wants, she can go to Oz.
And it wasn't just a dream that she had to get it out of her system.
Yeah, I definitely see it as, and I don't think the original intention was there for that, obviously, but I could see how it absolutely is and should be included in queer cinema because it is that story. And it's not just the flamboyancy and the musical numbers and Judy Garland and the stereotypical jokes, but it is that I need to be accepted and find people who accept me for who I am. And I ain't getting that in Kansas.
Right.
You know, it almost sounds like the way you guys just described it there. And almost maybe like Scream Queen, my Nightmare on Elm Street, where you pick up little points along the way of that documentary and Nightmare 2. And I can't seem to figure it out why, never mind, I'm getting off track. But with that, with everything you guys said, all joking aside, do you think part of that was because of having, say, too many cooks in the kitchen? Because you had 4 directors involved, and the directors were treated like traffic cops, and for the producers anyway. And there wasn't one direct vision for the project.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's part of why the film almost contradicts itself, to want her to have the adventure, but then to rescind that wish to ever leave again. I think it's part of the incoherency, a lot of in terms of what the film actually believes is true.
But I also think it's one of the rare examples where that happens and it doesn't hurt the film overall. I think having the different directors with different visions actually help this film in ways that it hurts other films, because it's not like other films. This film is pure fantasy. And pure fantasy doesn't have to be logical, doesn't have to make sense. So if you have different visions, hey, that's fine. Do you ever have a dream that makes sense?
Right.
Absolutely. What I don't understand, and as a film historian, you could help me out on this, is that, look, most people who know film or study film will say that 39 was the greatest year for American films. And you can run down the list of films that came out that year that, people's jaws drop when they realize, oh my God, all those films came out that year. And, from epics like Wizard of Oz and Gone with the Wind to classics like Mr. Smith Goes to Washington, Gunga Din, and one of my all-time favorite Boris Karloff films. Plus you got Son of Frankenstein. Plus you got the Hunchback remake. You got all these great films. And Wizard of Oz stands out as being the one that I can see people scratching their head going, what? Okay, you want to make this movie about what and how much money do you want? And people are going to go see this? There's going to be a scarecrow singing and you want how much money? And yet it got done. Which means there were that many scripts that were that good floating around Hollywood that year. How the hell did Oz ever get made?
That's a good question. I wonder if it was partially the kind of mythology behind Baum's novel that propelled this. Maybe it had a pre-soldness in the minds of the producers. Maybe it was a desire to create a true American fable, which I think maybe hadn't been done on film before. Capitalizing on Disney's successes. I think all of those things kind of came together to make this property kind of rise to the surface.
I mean, I could just see MGM going, all right, look at all these scripts I can get and made for 1/3 the budget, or 1/4 the budget, or 1/8 the budget. Do I really want to stick our necks out on the line for this? Right. It's really fascinating. It's something that wouldn't happen today.
Right.
No one's going to take a risk like that today. They're only going to invest big money in something that's guaranteed. And that was far from guaranteed. Wizard of Oz was far from a guarantee, especially since every other version had pretty much failed. It didn't have a good track record.
Yeah.
So Andy might be able to debunk kind of one of the things me and Brian were talking going into this. And obviously at the time it was a $2.7 million budget, which was, as Brian said, huge. The film was very popular at the box office at the time, but it failed to make a profit until its re-release in 49 for MGM. Mind you, when you go back to when it was released initially, they were counting on, and this is what I was bringing up to Brian as well, the international release. But part of the problem with the international release, and Brian said, yeah, I could see that kind of being an issue.
Yeah,
was
a little bit.
Yeah. A week or 7 days later, on September 1st, there was something called, the September Campaign and Polish Defensive War 1939, which kind of ended up starting World War II. So yeah, I could see that being a hiccup.
Little bit of a hiccup in the foreign market.
Yeah.
Now the thing is, if the film came out a year later or 2 years later when the war was on, it would have done smashing business everywhere because it was the ultimate escapism.
Yeah.
But you got to remember, not making it. I think it actually made its budget back on initial release, but not much of a profit. But you're talking at a time when what was the average ticket price for a film? 10 cents. You know, and to make $2.7 million back, and there weren't multiplexes, kids. The films, your city had one theater that had one screen. You could only run the film 3 times a day, 4 times a day, maybe. It's not like a film can come out and run 32 times in Buffalo alone a day. You know, so it was tough making the money back, and the fact that it made close to $3 million on initial release is insane.
Right. Yeah, agreed.
And the other thing too is, and I was going to bring up, Brian just mentioned it about the not having multi screens running things, but you got to remember these theaters also bought other movies to be seen at the time, so they would have to. Okay, you're going to get Oz 3 times, but we also got to play Gone with the Wind. We got to play this one. We got to. There's other.
Look at all the other great films that year it had to compete with. Every one of those theaters wanted every one of those films. So how is a film going to do that well? When do you want Gunga Din? Do you want Mr. Smith Goes to Washington? Do you want, the Gorilla with the if you want comedy, the Ritz Brothers put out a movie. So many great films, and one screen at a time in one city, and you know, to make that profit, it's still pretty damn good. And I don't care what anybody says. It had nothing to do with cancel culture. Wizard of Oz is a way better movie than Gone with the Wind.
I agree.
There you go. I said it. And I'm happy I said it.
You can send all hate mail to Boxing Guy Bright. No, I wouldn't. I wouldn't give out his email like that. That wouldn't be right.
It's sort of how much a legacy. There was a study done by the University of Turin, where they did some data mining on IMDb, looking at what is the most quoted film of all time, and Wizard of Oz came to the top. Both quoted in dialogue, imagery, plot structures. It really kind of became a touchstone for future filmmakers in a way that I don't think Gone with the Wind ever kind of reached that capability.
No, the best thing about Gone with the Wind was the Carol Burnett parody. It's everything about the Wizard of Oz was so memorable too. I mean, you could talk to someone who hasn't seen the film in 25 years, 30 years, and you'll say, hey, remember when they went through the poppy field? Boom, that image will come right back in their head. Other than 1 or 2 key scenes in Gone with the Wind, people won't remember anything from it. But everything in The Wizard of Oz is so visually stunning. Even the first scenes, the black and white scenes at the barn, they're visually stunning because of the way they're shot. They really are. But then when the door opens to Technicolor, I mean, I remember being a kid watching the film, and I'm 50 years old. I'm not that old. So when I say I was a kid, I wasn't in the theater seeing it as a kid. I saw it on television like we all did in the 1970s, having no idea what it was, but it was the yearly tradition. Wizard of Oz was always on TV, and my mother sat me down when I was old enough to watch it. And when she opens that door and the screen went color, my mind was blown on an old 70s television set. Imagine people in 1939 seeing that 40 feet high. That's the impact of Wizard of Oz.
I'm curious to know, Andy, since you deal with students on a regular basis when you talk about this topic, and obviously there's a lot of stuff we won't get to tonight, but what would you say is the biggest surprise that your students usually pick up on when you talk about this movie?
Yeah, good question. I think it's one of those films that you have a cultural memory of, even if you haven't seen it. And I think I think students are surprised by Judy Garland's performance. For starters, I think they are surprised by the sheer spectacle of it, particularly in Munchkinland. That's a scene we review a lot, and the sort of plasticine quality of that sequence is really fascinating. We get a lot of mileage out of that sequence in the opening into that world, and I think that they are. Yeah, I think they're fascinated as well as its presentation of the Emerald City, and its sort of the overall design of Oz as a space.
Oz is so influential in so many ways, and I just want to give you a little anecdote about how Oz could stream into everything else. And I'm a writer. And when I was pitching a book to my publisher last week, and when he asked, they said to me, "Okay, but why? Why would this book be?" I'm not going to give the details because it's NDAs right now because it's in the process of getting signed. My description, and it has nothing to do with films or Oz, but my description was, it's like being in the land of Oz before you see the man behind the curtain. And the publisher knew what I was talking about. And that has nothing to do with, the book has nothing to do with Oz or movies or anything, but just the description, because it's like being in the land of Oz before seeing the man behind the curtain. And they get it. And I think a lot of people will get references like that. That's how impactful this movie has been on 4 generations now.
Pay no attention to that man behind the curtain. The great Oz has spoken.
I keep forgetting it's 4 generations now. My question for you, and you don't have to answer, you can hold up fingers so no one can see. How old are you?
46.
Okay, so we're about the same
not
age.
far behind. Yeah.
I don't know of anybody our age that did not see The Wizard of Oz growing up.
Yeah.
I mean, it was a holiday event when The Wizard of Oz was on TV. That was a big deal every year.
Yeah.
But today, in the age of 1 million TV channels and cable and social media and the internet, how many of your students, how many people in their late teens, early 20s coming in have never seen it?
Well, I'd say the majority of them actually probably.
That blows my mind.
Yeah. And they can probably give me a rough summary of what happens in the film, having never seen it, because it has so kind of like infused culture. I guess this is the other thing that they're really interested in is when I show them Wizard of Oz or The Wiz, and then they go, "Oh, this reminds me of the Hunger Games," and I'm like, "Yes, there would be no Hunger Games if there wasn't Wizard of Oz, right?" And so I think that then seeing how much it's sort of infused other films, other narratives. There's a really good piece by Joel Chastain where he says that after Wizard of Oz, there was the Ozification of children's literature, and so that the success of Wizard of Oz actually changed the way that children's literature was written, where children who were sort of more aggressive and take charge and more like goal-oriented protagonists, they become more passive, and their primary desire is to just get home, and even change books to be more like the 1939 film in terms of its plot. So incredibly influential, not just on film, but on just the field of children's literature.
It blows my mind that 2/3 of the students would have never seen it, because I can't comprehend anybody our age not having seen the film. I mean, it was such a big, it's almost like It's a Wonderful Life. Everybody our age has seen It's a Wonderful Life. You know,
none of my students have seen it,
and none of you, I guarantee, I was going to say none of them have seen it.
Yeah.
And that's with a lot of classic films. Do you remember probably about 8-10 years ago, it was for one of the anniversaries, I think Turner Classic Movies completely restored Casablanca. And they found an immaculate print. They redid it, and it was cleaned up so that it would look brand new as though it was released that day. And they released it to 10 theaters. Now, in 10 theaters in the country, it was a big contest. You had to write in why your city should get it. And 10 cities got the full premiere opening night of Casablanca, seeing a print that was so immaculate, it was brand new. Buffalo was one of them. I got to go to it. And I went with my girlfriend and another couple that we all loved the film. And we were probably 4 of the only people in the sold out. Well, it wasn't sold out because they gave the tickets away to the contest winners. Of people, no one else had ever seen the film. So, and I'm like, they were all college age kids. And I'm like, how have they never? It blew my mind. How did they never see Casablanca? And then I'm like, oh God, how are they going to like it? Because it's so different from today. First time I've been in a theater in years that a film got a standing ovation at the end.
Wow.
Which really impressed me, but it also scared me that no one in this theater has seen this film. And it's that iconic a film. And that's like Wizard of Oz. My mind can't wrap around people getting up into their 20s and have never seen the Wizard of Oz.
Yeah, because we think of it as like a heritage film, right? That is something that parents show their children. Apparently not always the case.
I know they said when VCRs first became a big thing, the 3 things that sold VCRs more than anything were pornography, wrestling, and the Wizard of Oz.
What?
That was the 3 things.
That's amazing.
Yeah, it was pornography was the big one, wrestling tape traders for people all over the country, and the Wizard of Oz was the #1 selling video forever because every family had to have the Wizard of Oz.
Exactly. And I was going to bring up, because Brian mentioned first his mom plopping him in front of the TV to watch it annually. It's funny. And you could actually call my parents and they would tell you it would drive them nuts, because I'm the youngest in the room. I'm going to be 40 in August. But I had the concept of, and for folks who don't, those younger listeners who don't know what VHSs are, they were actually tapes about yay high and yay wide.
About the size of a
put
book.
Into a machine. Yeah. About the size of the wrestler's wrestler. You pop in. And which is a Brian Young project. But no, it was either I would get up early, 2.5, plop in either Wizard of Oz or Masters of the Universe in flip-flop.
Yep.
Yeah, at 2 and 3 years old because of the fantasy element to them. And let it be written. And I would drive. They got so sick of hearing Follow the Yellow Brick Road by the time I was 4.
See, now it's funny because I'm the middle child in my family. I have an older brother who's 4 years older than me, and my younger brother's 15 months younger. So we're very close in age, me and him. And my earliest memories of watching that film, and it was once a year because it predated VCRs. We're old, folks. Was that everybody would get so excited that the Wizard of Oz was coming on, including my older brother, but he was scared shitless of the flying monkeys. And he would always hide his face and run out of the room when the flying monkeys came on for years. But yet he couldn't wait to watch the rest of the film the whole year. And he'd get excited to watch again until the monkeys came on. And it was like that till he was 23, 24, maybe, when he stopped being afraid of the monkeys. But yeah, I mean, it was, I don't mean to sound like Topol, but it was tradition. I mean, you put it best when you said it was, how did you say it?
A heritage film?
A heritage film, which is exactly what it was.
Yeah.
And we would talk about it in school the next day. You know, all the kids, did you watch Wizard of Oz? I say, yeah. Did you watch Wizard of Oz? You know, it's a magical film.
And I finally found it because Brian mentioned it. But there's my copy of Casablanca.
That's the one they released after they did the remastered copy. Yeah.
Okay.
Beautiful.
As Andy's learning, I'm usually like the prop comic. You know, I got something for everything.
Yeah. We love comically oversized props.
So, where do we want to go next with this? Because obviously, so much. Andy mentioned it earlier about the jitterbug and all when talking about Shirley Temple and stuff. Do you know the reason why they didn't keep that in the film?
I remember actually. John, you might know.
I would assume, and I'm just pulling this out of my ass, but I would assume it was for time.
Wash your hands when you're done.
Yeah, well, I bathe. It was a long film for the time too.
Mm-hmm.
Could have been for time.
Very possible.
I don't know exactly why. Or maybe, test audiences, that kind of brings the film to a standstill. Like, we're all with it. We're with you. We're with you with it. And then, oh, Jesus. All right, we're with you again. That happens a lot.
Yeah. But from the technological standpoint, gentlemen, I think this was 7th or 8th, somewhere down the line, to use Technicolor in production. Mm. So, and there's a debate what's in the credits. Some say photographed in Technicolor, not color sequences by Technicolor. It's a game of semantics, I guess you would say. So how difficult you think that was bringing this technology to the forefront at that time?
Very, very difficult. I mean, and you needed to have a chemist on set to do what they did. I think for that, it's a kind of a technological marvel. For what it was able to achieve and the lushness of color in this, and the way that this gold, green, red palette has become iconic, another sort of real legacy of this film.
And also, it's the first and I think only time that Technicolor was mastered. I don't think a film came after it that was as vibrant until technology changed again. It's really amazing what they were able to do. I think it was a perfect storm, maybe of accidents, because name another Technicolor film that looked even nearly as good. You can't. I mean, they just don't exist. I mean, there's ones that look good, but especially Munchkinland. It's so colorful and so many different popping colors, and yet nothing bleeds, nothing looks bad, nothing is dull. It's perfect.
I think to your point earlier too, the fact that it was fantasy allowed them to kind of play with these things, whereas Gone with the Wind needed to reproduce a certain reality. But I think the Munchkinland is a great example where this sort of candy coatedness of it really kind of works in its favor.
Yeah.
And who hasn't wanted to walk the yellow brick road?
Well, speaking of walking the yellow brick road, and depending on the condition, I will say, or state of mind one might be, and I just actually learned this morning when I got up, there was Roger Waters made an appearance on the Joe Rogan show, and he debunks about the dark side of the moon and Oz. There's a thing. But what was the story? Was it the whole album would cover from A to B with the movie, or what was that?
Yeah, that's my understanding. Is that the music kind of reinforced the imagery in the film? Well, do you remember what the debunking was? I haven't heard this.
Well, Joe Rogan brought it up, and I'll send you the clip.
Yeah.
Asked him about the whole, just that album and being connected with Oz.
Yeah, I think it's why do we see images in clouds? Because our brain tells us to. When you put The Wizard of Oz on the same time as Dark Side of the Moon, why does it match up perfectly with us? Because our brains tell us it does. Yeah. There's probably a couple coincidences, but that'll happen. It could probably happen with any album. You want to see how that works? Get really high one night, put on any album in the Nature Channel and watch animal documentaries with the volume off and just any album playing, and you'll see it matches perfectly.
Right.
So, I mean, not that I'm encouraging y'all to do that, but
hey, it's legal in most states now.
That's right.
So.
And it's hilarious.
Let's be fair. It's legal in most spots. So hey,
I want to get controversial for a minute. Can we do that?
Mm-hmm.
And here's the crying controversial moment of the night. Go for it.
Dorothy's the villain.
Was that before or after the pills and stuff they had on set?
Dorothy's the villain. She fucking killed 2 witches. Unprovoked. She's the bad guy.
Yeah, not only that, if you read it from that angle, the Wicked Witch of the West shows up, her sister's dead, and she's like, all I want is my sister's belongings.
Yeah,
right?
they're my family heirlooms.
I mean, it's interesting why go for Dorothy rather than, say, Glinda, who
Dorothy dropped her house on the witch. Accident. Okay, just it's not murder one. I give you that. But she kills her, so Dorothy's the villain. Then she steals her shoes. Yeah, they were given to her, but she could have taken them off and said, "Here, they're your sister's shoes." She didn't do that. And then what she ends up doing? She ends up killing the other sister. Dorothy's the villain.
I think a fun way to read this too is that this is about American military service. That essentially Dorothy gets drafted into a war by the wizard, for which she's a foreigner, right? And if we read, like, originally people read Baum's novel a lot about it's the representative democracy process, right? It's an immigrant, a farmer, and a steel worker going to Washington, D.C., demanding things of representative democracy. But what's always interesting is that he sends them on a mission, one that he does not expect them to survive, right? He's surprised when they return alive. And so there's a way, I think, even in 1939, you read this as being drafted into military service, and the young, the immigrant class, the poor, serving the needs of a dictator in a lot of cases. And that was definitely, Baum's thinking. I mean, in Baum's novel, the wizard is a propagandist. And one of the things I find really interesting in this film is how the film lets him off the hook for everything that he does, essentially.
That's another thing I wanted to bring up, the joking aside. Although I do think Dorothy's the villain, I would prosecute. Mr. Smith Goes to Washington. They should hold hearings against Dorothy, because, first one, we understand it was an accident, but you can't blame the witch for being mad her sister was just killed in front of her. Can't be mad. She should seek revenge.
I'll get you, my pretty, and your little dog, too.
But in all seriousness, and not being funny now, the Wizard of Oz is not a good person.
Oh.
And they don't show him to be. They show him to be what he is. And yet you still walk away from that thinking he's good afterwards. How did that get past everybody, including myself as a kid watching that? It wasn't until I was an adult when I realized what an asshole he was. How did that escape us? Is it because we were all sucked into the fantasy so hard? What do you think? I mean, you've studied this.
Yeah, there's something interesting that the film does where it primes us to think of the wizard as a well-meaning, maybe kind of dodgying old man, because we meet Professor Marvel before we ever meet the wizard, and we're set up to say, okay, these are analog characters. He has Dorothy's interest in his heart, and although he's what's the line? He's a good man, but not a very good wizard. And this is kind of like the idea that the film wants to put forward, that he is, no matter what he does, he has good intentions.
Now, do you think if they would have got the casting they wanted for it and would have had W.C. Fields as the wizard, I don't think we would have come away thinking he was good. I think what Fields would have brought to that role was showing what a bad person he was. Do you think that the writers maybe intended us to feel that way, and that's why they wanted Fields? And then the vision just changed and went in a different direction?
Is this because of Fields' kind of previous star image that we would get that, or because he's a comedic actor?
Because of his W.C. Fields, even as a comedic actor, was never the nicest comedian. Remember, he would, kick children in his films,
right.
Slap women. I mean, he never played a nice comic. He was always an asshole.
Yeah. Yeah, it's interesting. And the way that the wizard kind of resolves these conflicts, these people come to him expecting to gain certain things. In each case, he doesn't give them the thing that they want. He gives them a symbol of the thing they want.
A symbol.
Right? Yeah. So I can't give you courage, but I'm gonna give you a war medal, right? I'm gonna give you a diploma. And again, I really think of this as a metaphor for cinema, right? And I think it explains some of the interesting ideology of the film, where it says, look, whoever you are in small town America, you can't have the life you want, but you can go to the movies, right? You can step into Technicolor screen, you can live out this fantasy. But when the movie is over, we want you to go back to your shitty life, right? But come back when you need fantasy again, because we are the holders of fantasy. And I think that's why this is a film that says, I'm going to give you a symbol of the thing that's better than the real thing. And it's why the world doesn't look realistic, because it's Hollywood saying we can produce a reality that's better than reality. And you can come to us each time to have that dream, and then go back to your life, to your kind of crappy life, but dream again, right? When you need that fantasy. And that's part of this film's message of complacency, at least to young girls, to not want more than they have.
And this is why I'm a fan, Jonathan. This is why I'm a fan. That might be the single greatest description I've ever heard of this film, and you did it in less than 30 seconds. And I've read,
and that's why he gets paid the big bucks, Brian.
I've read people's theses on this film and everything. You just said in 30 seconds the best explanation I've ever heard of that film. Of Hollywood making a film about Hollywood. Yeah, your life sucks. Life is miserable. Life is dark and dreary and shit. But if you come to me for 2 hours, I can make it better.
Yeah.
But then you're going back. That's fucking profound, man. Man, you blew my mind. But that's the best way I've ever heard it put. And you're right. Going back to your early point, because of that, it has to go in the category of queer cinema now. Even though I don't think that was intended at the time, it has become that. It's morphed.
Arthur Freed's production unit had so many gay men in it, they called it Freed's Fairies.
Look, all Hollywood musicals had so many gay men in it that.
If we want.
Yeah, I mean, look, not everyone was actually sneaking the gay agenda into their films like James Whale did.
Yeah.
I don't think they were even shoehorning it into Oz without us knowing it, but I think it's become a symbol for such, and a powerful one. I think that's a main reason Judy Garland is such a gay icon. I think it's the Wizard of Oz.
Oh, yeah, definitely. There's Judy Garland's concerts became such a cruising ground for gay men. It became this place that people knew that would be a place where other gay men would congregate. And I mean, we say friend of Dorothy, right, as a sort of historic code for queer people. So I think it's. And there's theories too. There's a really good piece about Judy Garland's star image in gay men, and there's something about like the pain in her voice that is believed to have drawn a certain crowd, right?
There's also, and it's going to sound so weird to say it, there's a certain androgyny about her character of Dorothy, because she's not a woman, but she's not a girl. It's that weird in between depiction. Yeah, she's in a dress with pigtails, but she doesn't have much makeup on, does she?
Yeah.
It's almost like she is all of us.
There's also an interesting writing about what Mrs. Gulch represents, and as her sort of exaggerated form in the Wizard, she rides a bicycle, so that is a sort of symbol of feminism for the period and women's freedom, mobility. She is an unmarried business owner, a spinster, if you will. She's heavily coded as Jewish caricature in this as well. So she kind of represents everything that Dorothy shouldn't want to be.
Yeah.
And in this fantasy space, there's this sort of hyper-femme Glinda.
You want to be Glinda, yeah.
Well, of course you want to be Glinda, right? But it's interesting that Glinda is the only major character who has no analog in the real world, right? Because she's literally impossible in 1930s small town Kansas. No one can achieve that level of femininity and class status. And so Yeah.
I have a question about Glenda, and it's something I've and my girlfriend's right here now. I'm not blowing smoke up your ass. This is true.
Yeah.
We've actually discussed this before. That, okay, first off, Billy Burke is so beautiful in that film. I mean, just jaw-droppingly beautiful. But she was an older woman already. And that was not the Hollywood studio system to cast older women as beautiful characters. It was about casting ingenues and young, pretty women.
Right.
Why do you think they cast a middle-aged woman to play this character?
That's not I don't think she's supposed to be sexualized. I think she's supposed to
But she's
be,
gorgeous.
She is gorgeous.
To the point where she's glowing.
I think her beauty is supposed to be impossible. It's not supposed to be where she's a heavenly body in this. But yeah, it's funny. I don't think of her as an older woman, but you're right. They could have cast someone much younger, much more ingenue-like.
Yeah, it should have been Lana Turner, but they got, it just is so out of character for Hollywood at the time. When, this is a Hollywood that was telling women when they were 25 they were old.
Right.
And it just always baffled me that, I'm glad they did it, but I always thought what a bizarre casting choice for that character, and I'm so glad they did it because she was so perfect in it.
Yeah, absolutely.
Now, she's also a villain, I hate to break it to you, because she gave the shoes to Dorothy. So she's an accomplice.
There's a really good reading of this film. The BFI companion for this film was written by Salman Rushdie. And he hates Glinda. He has such kind of vitriol for her, and partially for sending Dorothy on this journey of self-discovery, for which it was never necessary, right? And for withholding information from her for how she could get home. But I think it's interesting thinking about modern views of this film, in particular having sympathy for the Wicked Witch, right? But the film says early on, I think it's Glinda says this actually, where she says, there's a shadiness to her. She says, good witches are beautiful, ugly, right? And then she also asks Dorothy if she's a good witch or a bad witch, which I always think is really funny. But I don't think the film ever questions that ideology, right? That ugly things are bad, and that or twisted things are bad, and that clean, beautiful things are inherently good. And
I have a little problem with Salman Rushdie too.
Yeah.
And a personal level, he ruined my biggest book signing.
Really?
Actually, yes, but it's not his fault. When he was stabbed in Fredonia, I was scheduled for a book signing there the next night.
Wow.
So it was actually the day after the stabbing, so they had to cancel it. So I lost some money, but I didn't care. I was more concerned with him getting stabbed, obviously. But in a weird kind of way, Salman Rushdie fucked up my book signing.
So, obviously, there's this.
Are you a good witch or a bad witch, Jonathan?
Oh, I'm certainly bad. You should know this by now.
All right.
But speaking of good witches, bad witches, faux pas, I don't know where you want to categorize it, but there's this long-standing rumor of one of the Munchkins hanging themselves. Brian's shaking his head. So, but that's why I want to try to debunk. So where does it, because something I read recently said about there might have been animals on set. So what is the full story about this whole hanging?
You seem to have a better memory of this than I do.
Yeah, the rumor always was, if you watch the scene where they're walking through the forest, you could see this swinging dead body of a Munchkin. It's completely not true. I think before they redid the film for the one release, it was a boom mic shot that you saw in the background, which, those things slip by in Hollywood. There was no dead Munchkin. There were a lot of drunk Munchkins, though.
To alcohol, the cause of and solution to all of life's problems.
And it's not just Judy Garland who always told that story. There were a lot of stories on the set about when they would have, I mean, I think until the movie Under the Rainbow, which you probably don't remember. Do you remember that film with Chevy Chase?
Thank you very little.
Yeah, Under the Rainbow broke the Wizard of Oz record for most little people in a film. And Under the Rainbow was about casting all the little people to play the Munchkins, the Wizard of Oz. So you're talking about little people being bussed in from all over the country and Canada and all over the world, really. And they all get together in one hotel to hang out. They've never been around so many people like themselves forever. Of course they're going to party and go nuts. And most of them were adults. So they're more than welcome to. What happens when anybody goes to a convention of their peers? Hey, what happens when you go to horror conventions, Andy?
Party.
Yeah, exactly. So there's all it's like, oh, the Munchkins apparently were drunk and taking it. No, they were doing what everybody does when they're at like a convention. Except it takes less to get them drunk. Send the hate mail to me. I'll accept it.
We represent the Lollipop Guild, the Lollipop Guild, the Lollipop Guild, and in the name of the Lollipop Guild, we wish to welcome you to Munchkin Land.
That's Boxing Guy Brian at ymail.com.
What I love was the lollipop kids. One of them is Harry Earl, who was already an established Hollywood star. He was in a couple very big films. He was in Freaks. He was in a couple films with Lon Chaney. So well-established Hollywood actor. And he was, I think, 50 at the time, or in his 40s, and the little person that was next to him was 16 or 17. And I defy people to realize that it's a 16-year-old sitting next to a 50-year-old in that scene. Another bit of magic of Jerry Marin was the one that was, I think, 16 or 17 at the time. And unless he just passed away recently, I think he was the last surviving cast member of The Wizard of Oz. But
yeah, there's an uncanny valleyness to those actors.
Yes.
They look like old children, right?
Yeah.
And they have that, again, that sheen over them, that plasticine quality that puts them somewhere toyetic, as well.
Yeah, and then Hollywood was destroyed for little people with The Lord of the Rings. Ooh, we can make them little people with camera effects now.
Are you following me, camera guy?
I think that, if you want to cancel people, that's who should be canceled. People who took the little people out of Hollywood. Sorry, that's my soapbox.
Or you could say, yeah, or you could, if you're going to go on that soapbox, before you fully step down, and it's off topic, is the whole Peter Dinklage live action version of wanting to do Snow White. And then Hornswoggle went to bat for.
Well, Peter Dinklage is, one of the few working little people actors. Good for him. But
why would you, from comments he said, why would you want to take away work from other people if there was potential work for him?
Well, I don't. I think him casting in that film it's terrible. I'm not defending that. I'm just saying that for years, the top professions for little people in America were actors and stuntmen. And they took a lot of that away. It's you're taking a livelihood away from a group of people that I think was wrong just because Peter Jackson didn't want to work with them.
Yeah, that's definitely another topic for another day we could debate all day.
I think they still primarily do stunt work for child actors. That was a big one too.
We'll have to talk to Kane about that on Saturday there.
Yeah, definitely.
He would have more insight on that, being coming from the stunt world.
If you don't mind, do you mind if I ask Andy a couple more questions about
Feel free.
When did you fall in love with Oz to the point that you said, I really want to make a study of this?
I mean, part of it was that study I mentioned earlier from the University of Turin, and I wanted to investigate along with my students about like why is this film told and retold in so many different ways. I think my own reaction to the film of why she wouldn't stay in Oz, and that seemed to me as a child a so much more obvious choice, and how that ending always felt kind of insufficient for me. And I think just as a historian, I think it's with examining that legacy for all the reasons that we mentioned, all the reasons why this should not have been a success, and yet you look at its kind of continuing legacy. So I get really interested in those types of stories that get told over and over again. And actually, this story is called the home leaving fantasy. So everything from Alice in Wonderland to Moana. And it's usually a story we tell girls, right? Our coming of age narratives for the boys and girls are usually very different. The boys' narrative tends to be the conquest, right? The sort of the colonizing narrative of go forth, conquer the dragon, get the treasure, institute yourself as king. The story we tend to tell girls is go, have an adventure, fall down the rabbit hole, go to Oz, become a mother for a while, learn how to be a mother in this fantasy space, but then come back because you've gotten it out of your system. And often in these stories, it was just a dream. It was just a fantasy that they got out of their system. So I get really interested in like the gendered nature of coming out stories. I tend to write about representation of children in cinema. It's one of my areas. And so, yeah, I get really interested in the coming of age narrative and what that means.
Do you mind if I ask you a personal question about this?
Yeah.
When did you not come to terms, but come to understand your own sexuality?
Around 15, 16.
Did the film resonate with you on that level at that point, or was it something that came later?
That's a really good question. I don't have a great answer for that, but it's definitely something I reassessed later. I'll say this personal anecdote. Probably my favorite film of all time is E.T. And I remember watching that film as a child. I remember breaking my leg playing soccer, and I cried all the way to the hospital, not because it hurt, but because I was going to miss the world television premiere of E.T. that night. Something my students don't understand, like what a big deal that was. And how I would have to wait months to see it again, to reserve the copy from the library so I could watch it when it came out on VHS. But putting this course together, I realized that, E.T. is just reverse Oz.
Absolutely.
E.T. is Dorothy, comes to a foreign land, meets three companions to help them get home. And what I remember about E.T., probably what struck me as a kid, is that it was the only coming of age narrative for boys, which tended to be like 3 o'clock high, right? Like assert yourself, like bully, conquer. This is the only film I remember where it said, part of being a man, thank you for that. Yeah, just showed the copy of E.T. Part of being a man is to have empathy and to care for other people. And I couldn't recall any other film that told me that when I was growing up.
I've always said films that are true coming of age stories that don't push it in your face that that's what it is are always the most effective. Which is why I tell people one of my favorite movies ever made is Saturday Night Fever, which people who don't know it think, oh, that's that stupid disco film. And I'm like, no, it's one of the best coming of age films ever made. But you don't know that because it didn't stuff it in your face and get preachy with it.
Yeah.
And then I show it to people who've never seen it, and they're like, oh my God, I can't believe what a good film that is. And you're right, E.T. was the same way. It's a coming of age story that's not preachy about being a coming of age story. It hides itself in this fantasy. The Wizard of Oz, I think, is a different type of coming of age story because it's not a coming of age story so much as it's a coming of acceptance story. She doesn't learn anything other than to be content.
Yeah.
That's all she learns.
Yeah.
And personally, I don't think that's a good narrative. I think it's one of the best movies ever made. But that message, I don't think is that good a message. But it's got flying monkeys, people. Come on.
Yeah, monkeys might fly out of my butt.
I mean, if we compare this to Baum's novel, Baum was writing this two young girls, and part of what he was saying, his mother, his what's the word? A mother-in-law was one of the leading suffragettes of the day, and it is a proto-feminist novel. It is a novel that says, look, all your life, people are going to tell you that you don't have brains, that you don't have courage. And you need to realize that you don't need someone to tell you if you have these things. You don't need them to kind of like bequeath you. If anything, these figures of authorities, particularly men in the world of Oz are frauds, right? It's women that actually have power in this
the
world.
witches.
Totally. And men are charlatans. They are propagandists. And so it's a really fascinating novel, and I have kind of like a dark take on the ideology of the 1939 film, even though it's a film that I am fascinated by, particularly for its influence. But yeah, and I think those kinds of things in Baum's novel spoke much more to a coming of age narrative. But you're right, the version that we get in the film, I often say that like Toto has more agency than Dorothy does. She's not a traditional goal-oriented protagonist. Things happen to her. And she often advances by crying, by eliciting sympathy. Seems to be the greatest tool in her arsenal. And so, yeah, I mean, at the end of the original novel, Dorothy gets mad and she throws water on the witch, right? But everything has to be sort of mollified in the film, which I find very fascinating.
Do you think that, and I've made this argument at places, that The Wizard of Oz is one of only a handful of films in history that completely changed cinema? And it might be the only one that at the time, I don't think people realized how much it changed cinema.
Yeah, I agree with that. Absolutely.
I mean, certain films like 2001 changed the way cinema was looked at, but everybody knew it instantly. Holy shit, we're seeing a new type of cinema. Oz changed the way people looked at cinema, but I don't think they realized. I think it slowly crept in.
Right. It had a lot to do with television. Yes, absolutely. I think it had, and you're right, it came out in this field, the 1939 film, where there was so much kind of competition for attention, but this one kind of outlasted them all.
It's amazing how a film might not even be the best received of the year, that outlives everything else.
Yeah,
you look at other films that, it's just another film that came out that year that are classics.
Yeah.
Citizen Kane failed at the box office.
Yeah,
of course it was sabotaged, but
it is a case to be made for like that box office success does not necessarily transmit to like a cultural imprint. I always use the example of Avatar. Like, how many people are cosplaying Avatar at conventions or learning Na'vi, whereas something like John Carpenter's Halloween had this immense cultural imprint, and it reached this sort of iconic status.
I never understood the Avatar obsession. I mean, look, again, send the hate mail this way, that's fine. But I don't blame Cameron for it either. I think what he was doing was, I've got all this new technology I'm working on. I'm going to throw together something so simple and basic, and I'm not even going to think about it, but I'm going to see what I can do with this technology. And people latched onto it like it was something unheard of. I'm sorry, it was Dancing with Wolves with aliens. Some of the dialogue is even the same from Dances with Wolves. He took some of the dialogue, but that's not, because I don't think he was trying to create this new cultural impact. I think he was trying to show off his technology and experiment with it. So I don't blame Cameron. I blame the fans who latched onto that film that was so boring. Beautiful, but boring.
So to kind of put a bow on this, because we could speak several more hours on this topic, obviously. But at least for me, my final question would be for both of you is, what is the true lasting legacy of Oz?
I'll go first because you're the professional at this, and yours is going to be so much more profound than mine, so I'll let people forget it. To me, Look, as a film historian and a film nut, it's one of my favorite films of all time, not only for its technical achievements, that, I could talk for hours about, the camera work and the lighting and how brilliant it is on that level. But there's something that's so warm and friendly about the film that at 50, when I watch the film, I feel like I'm 5. It's like The Wizard of Oz is like putting on the most comfy pajamas in the world and having a cup of hot chocolate. It's just, what's that? Yeah. When my girlfriend was in the military and got sick and had to be hospitalized, it was The Wizard of Oz that made her feel better. It's something, it's comfort food, but it also works on so many levels that it wouldn't be comfort film if it didn't, because you would get bored as an adult of just the ice cream would start to bore you as an adult without the layers of other stuff. It's the perfect feel good movie, and it's about as perfect a film as you can get. Even though Dorothy's the villain and the moral is bad, it's still the perfect movie.
Well, I think maybe that's like the interesting thing, right? That even though the moral is bad, here's what I'll say. So when I write about film, I'm less interested in the authorship side of things, like what did the author intend when they made this film. I get really interested in the audience side of things, and I write about the emotional experience of movie going, and how do different subsets of audience subcultures, how do they interpret films differently. The very fact that this film has been reinterpreted in so many ways to think about the wizard as the villain, and to rethink the moral line, something like Wicked, I think is really successful at that. Wicked, by the way, in the original novel, influenced by Salman Rushdie's reading of the film, which really looked at Linda as the villain. But I think it is an offering to so many different types of people. I think it reads differently as a child than as an adult. It reads differently from a rural perspective versus a metropolitan perspective. Gender-wise, I think it's what good cinema does, right? Is that it's an offering to the audience to create meaning, and so many artists have thought and reinterpreted and use this film for their own purposes to rethink all kinds of issues in American culture, from immigration to gender to sexuality. And so that's what I would say is its legacy, is that it is archetypal in a way that we hadn't seen in American cinema before then.
And it feels good.
And it's a feel-good film.
Yeah. What about you, Jonathan? What's your takeaway of The Wizard of Oz?
I would say the technological aspect of things, for what they were able to do in 1938, 39, everything leading into the movie, that obviously there was a couple mishaps with it, but overall they were able to step so far beyond their reach that future movies were able to learn from that. Kind of like what Disney did with was it Snow White? Did he really set the tone for anime? Well, not so much. Well, yeah, maybe with animation, but they did it on a grand scale with a
you're
film,
right.
When you think about it.
Absolutely, 100%. They changed the way films could be made. They changed the way films could look. They changed the technology side of the film far more than they realized they were doing, and far more than the audience realized they were doing at the time. It's like I said a little while ago that 2001 changed everything so much, but everyone saw it instantly and knew that the world is different now. Wizard of Oz, the world was different after that movie, but they didn't realize it yet. And that's another, you're right, lasting legacy is, like you said to your student, wow, this reminds me of the Hunger Games.
Yeah. Right on. Andy, where can people find your reading or your writings and the book and everything that you were involved with? Because where's the best spot they could check that stuff out if they wish to?
Sure, I have a website that has a lot of my scholarly work on it, things I'm working on right now. with a company called Rainbow Cult, which does immersive cinema experiences, kind of like doing Rocky Horror, but with other movies. You can find information about that at rainbowcult.org, and then my personal site is adscahill, SCAHILL.com.
Awesome. And Brian, they can find you behind a dumpster at Nickel City Con next week.
That's right. Nickel City Con, I'll be there. And Transatlantic History Ramblings. You can find that on any podcast platform. You can pick up The Rustler's Rustler in any bookstore or Amazon.com. Working on a new book that, when I do reveal anything on it, you'll be the first show I do that on, Jonathan. And everybody also go watch the documentary Scream Queen. Check out Andy in it, because it really is one of the best documentaries on horror and film that you will see, and society as a whole, and our culture, and how our culture's changed since the 1980s to now. Incredible documentary, and it's just an incredible piece of work, Andy.
Thank you.
Gentlemen, thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Hey there, Friday fans. We know how much you enjoy the movies. Enjoy grabbing your Friday merchandise and interacting with the Friday family, whether it be at conventions or during our particular watch-alongs. Well, when you're looking to get yourself masks, why not check out our friends over at Camp Blood Customs out of New York State and order your specific custom mask from any of the films. All orders are made specifically. Your needs and wants are. Make sure you find Camp Blood Customs on Facebook, Instagram, and all over social media and order yours today.
Hey guys, it's Candace Michelle, and I'm so excited to be a part of Crazy Train Radio. I hope you guys tune in to this live interview.